Tuesday, May 2nd. It is 2:02 p.m. Madam Secretary, would you read the roll?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chairwoman Rivera,
Here.
Vice Chairman Pierce, Member Bettenker,
Here.
Member DeSimone, Member Johnson,
Present.
Member Scholl,
Present.
Member West,
Present.
Executive Director Robert Raposa,
Present.
Legal Counsel Ray Marcio.
Present.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. We have a quorum. We will begin. Item number 1 on the agenda, the board may discuss and vote to approve the minutes of the meeting held on Tuesday, April 4th, 2023. Do we have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved. So moved.
Moved by Mr. Scholl, seconded by Mr. West. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
Madam Chair, I
Yes.
was not present, so I don't know, do I abstain? Okay.
Mrs. Johnson abstains. All others are in favor. Motion carries. Item number 2, the board may discuss and vote upon the submission of Sub A in order to modify Legislative Bill, House Bill 6032, Senate Bill 0842, and House Bill 5955, Senate Bill 0843, pending before the General Assembly, in accordance with the language attached to this agenda. Mr. Raposa, would you like to address this?
Good afternoon, members of the board. Before you today are the Sub A for House Bill 6032 and Senate Bill 842, which were originally submitted at the request of the board and pertain to a voter receiving assistance in applying for or casting a mail ballot, and is based on a recommendation from the disability advocate groups that a Sub A mirror the language in Rhode Island General Law 17-19-26.1, which regulates a voter receiving assistance at the polling place. The language in 17-19-26.1 provides that a voter may receive assistance at the polls by reason of blindness, disability, or the inability to read or write. And that language has replaced the term physical incapacity, which was used in the original bill. Based on a meeting last week between myself, Deputy Director Miguel Nunez, and Commissioner David Scholes, we have also included language that allows the voter's assistant to optionally include their telephone number and email address in addition to their name, signature, and residence address. Based on the feedback from the bill sponsors, language from these two bills submitted at the request of the board, House Bill 5955 and Senate Bill 0843, which pertains to a 3-day transmittal period for the acceptance of mail ballots upon the deadline to receive them at the local board, has been merged with House Bill 6032 and Senate Bill 0842. And this would then create one Sub A. House Bill 6032 would be eliminated. It would now become House Bill 5955 Sub A, and it would remain Senate Bill 0842. And anyone on the board have any questions regarding this change that is before you today?
Mr. Scholes, did you want to say anything before we commence?
Well, I think that when it's drafted, I think it works well, and it provides the protections that we're looking for. And also clarifies the language of who can make a mark on the ballot so that we know that the person's assisting, that person will have some sort of identification of that assistant. So, Bob, good job.
Thank you.
I appreciate the fact that he can keep it all straight, to be honest with you. Any of the board members have any questions? Hearing none, does the board wish to take an action?
I move approval.
Mr. Scholes makes a motion to approve as submitted. Do we have a second? Ms. Bettenker, you seconded? Any other discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Unanimous vote of the board to approve. Item number 3, the board may discuss and vote upon the submission of a Sub-A in order to modify legislative bill, House Bill 5957, Senate Bill 0844, pending before the General Assembly in accordance with the language attached to this agenda. Mr. Reposo?
The two pieces of legislation just mentioned by the chair, again, would become a sub-A. It pertains to the board originally submitted a request to be submitted by the General Assembly to allow a change for us to hear challenges to nomination papers from 2 days to 7 days. And as you are all aware, in 2022, the 2-day timeframe that is in state law does not work. So the 7 days, which has been submitted in working with the Elections Division of the Department of State, we have come up with a leave. There is changed the 2 days which is before you this afternoon, 2 days to 3 days for challenges to candidates that are in a primary, but have a 7-day total. So from day 4 to day 7, we can address the candidates that are being challenged that are only going to be on the November ballot. And by doing that, they also, all the individuals that would be challenging signatures would be subject to rules and regs that this board would create and adopt.
So the timeline for the primary was much more condensed, and it was difficult to do, but for the general election, it would be easier to.
It
It'll give us
was,
more time.
originally, we had 2 days for everything, according to existing law. Now we would have 3 days for primaries and up to 7 for candidates that are not on the primary ballot.
Understood. Board members have any questions?
I
Ms.
do.
Bettenker?
Yeah, I have another, it's the language right above, actually. So I agree with the 3 days and 7 days. This is like a sentence, I read it 5 times and I still can't understand it. So it says the state board shall not consider any challenge in the absence of a written basis to the local board's rejection of an endorser. Why can't I understand what that means? I legitimately read it 6 times.
That is under 1714A.
Correct, yes, it's.
The last sentence in red.
It's the last sentence in red, thank you.
This would be written, this would be based on rules and regs that we would create, that before you would hear this, that the challenger would have to be eligible to do so based on our regulations.
It's also meant to create some balance because we learned during the last election cycle, or the last set of challenges, not all of the local boards were putting in writing the basis, whether it's even a code that they might follow, but there was just no basis at all. They would have to do so. Likewise, in order to facilitate your review of any challenges, the challenger himself or herself would have to come forward and say, here's the basis for it. You can't just say, I challenge every signature in the nomination papers process. Instead, you have to come forward and say, for signatures X, Y, and Z, here's the basis.
So they would have to handle that in writing.
Yes.
That's what it is. Okay.
Yep.
So,
Go ahead,
yeah,
please.
just to piggyback, that makes more sense. I remember the conversation. So this wouldn't establish the system of how the local boards identified why something was wrong. Because it says in writing, and in my head, I'm picturing people just
Yeah,
So we would establish rules
A
and regulations
regulation.
and a potentially coding system,
Right.
protocol, something like that. And this is just saying the challenger needs to provide they need to put it in writing,
as
challenge.
to the basis.
Okay,
Yeah.
sorry. I don't have
So
my
whether
words,
we codify this throughout every 39 communities or in some other way, regulate it so that everybody knows what the basis is, because that's only fair to the person who's trying to present a challenge. They should know if it's a discrepancy or
Mhm.
lack of enough on the address, anything of that nature.
Yeah.
Right.
That was a helpful question. actually.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, because I was like, wait, this doesn't.
Mhm, mhm.
And then last question: do we know who the sponsor of this legislation is? And if it has been heard already in committee, or if we just
This has been heard.
We're just submitting
I
language.
do not have the name of the sponsor at this time, but it has been heard, and then we are submitting the sub A
Okay.
to make the change.
Thank you.
Secretary, let the record reflect Mr. D. Simone is here at 2:12. Any other questions of Bob at this point regarding this legislation, or Mr. Marcaccio? Okay, hearing none. Do we have an action we wish to take?
Move to approve?
Mr. Scholes makes a motion to approve. Do we have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mrs. Johnson.
Yes.
Any other discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
Madam Chair, I'll abstain since I missed the discussion.
Mr. D. Simone abstains. All others vote in favor. Passes. Item number 4. The board may discuss and vote on their recommendation for legislative bill, House Bill 6309, which has been introduced to the General Assembly. Mr. Reposa.
This bill is being brought to you this afternoon for you to weigh in on your position of no position, support, or oppose. This was a bill that was introduced after the Board of Elections Election Committee had suspended into a future date. The staff does support this bill. What it does is currently, the way the law is written, the presidential primary in 2024 would be held on April 23rd, which is Passover. And we cannot have a election on a religious holiday. So this legislation moves the presidential preference primary for this time only to April 2nd, 2024.
Makes good sense. Any questions?
I move to approve the bill and make a recommendation that we support it.
Mr. D. Simone makes a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Scholes. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It's unanimous. The board approves the bill. Item number 5, the board may discuss and vote on their recommendation for legislative bill, House Bill 6273, which has been introduced to the General Assembly. Mr. Reposa.
Lastly, this bill also never was presented to you previously. This bill was submitted on the last day before the General Assembly recessed for their spring break. It was then ultimately scheduled for a hearing on the week that they returned from spring break. We did not have enough time to schedule a board meeting, so the staff did go and testify on this bill. With the staff's opinion, we made it very clear this was not the opinion of the board. This bill has been sponsored by the prime sponsor on this is John Brian, and he would like to establish a new section for early voting within Chapter 19 under Title 17, which governs the conduct of elections and removes the existing reference to early voting from Chapter 20. Chapter 20 of Title 17 is for mail ballots and emergency voting. It does not cover early voting, but it is referred to now with one word to the process during the 20 days as early voting as well, which governs mail ballots. As you know, currently, in-person early voting in Rhode Island is technically considered emergency mail voting, with the requirement that the voter complete an application on an electronic poll book and cast their ballot immediately into a voting machine at the Board of Canvassers, similar to what voters perform on Election Day. House Bill 6273 would also shorten the early voting period from 20 days to 14 days during the normal business hours of the local board. The 6-day difference translates to 4 business days. The 5th day and the 6th day would be Saturday and Sunday. And it is offered during weekends, but not required. During the time frame after the mail ballot deadline and before the start of the early voting period, voters still have the opportunity to request an emergency ballot cast at the Board of Canvassers using the paper application, and they would also receive a ballot that would then be voted upon, sealed in the oath envelope, and then delivered to the Board of Elections by the local canvassing board or put into one of our drop boxes for our couriers to pick up and bring back to this location. The ballot would need to be received by 8 p.m. on election night for those emergency ballots that are cast outside of the DS 200. The shortened early voting period is advantageous to the Board of Elections due to the fact that, as you know, after the primary in 2022, we developed the protocol for logic and accuracy testing of the DS 200s and the express vote and also the DS 850s. Testing is expected to take significantly more time to complete into the future. By reducing the early voting by the 6 days or the 4 business days allows the Board of Elections to conduct their testing more efficiently and expeditiously to get the equipment out to the local boards. But this proposal establishes that the early voting site shall be governed under the same protections and procedures as the polls on election day. Currently, early voting is allowed in the state, again, under Chapter 20 of Title 17, which is mail ballots, and the staff believes that the voting of this early voting should be moved to Chapter 19 of Title 17, which is titled Conduct of Elections and Voting Equipment and Supplies. For reference purposes, we did a report on mail ballot, early voting ballots that were cast during the six calendar days, 4 business days in 2022. And it was 15.5% of the total ballots, which translates to 10,965 ballots statewide compared to the 70,872 ballots which were cast for the primary and for the general election, and for the primary 13.3%, 2,249 ballots were cast during this period of a total 16,870, which were cast in total during early voting in 2022.
Any questions of Mr. Reposa?
I have several questions and concerns. So, the first one, my first very specific question is the people who wrote this. Do we know if they reached out to the Board of Elections for wording about the content of this bill beforehand? That's my first question.
They did not.
They did not. Great. So, as they were writing the law that now allows for early voting for 20 days has been around for less than a year, right? And so there are legislators writing this, which happens every year, that might not have too much knowledge of the content or the process. And so I'm a little concerned about shortening, certainly, a law that passed less than a year ago that has expanded voting access to thousands of Rhode Island voters. And in less than a year, we're going to cut that by 6 days, which I can understand, the idea of technicality and testing. Nevertheless, it's less than a year. We have a presidential election next year. We don't know what a normal presidential election looks like under this new law. It should be exciting for the Board of Elections to be part of that. And so I'm a little concerned and sort of questioning as to, I understand that there's always hurdles around getting volunteers and staff at our local boards of canvassers. Nevertheless, I'd also love to know, either now or later, how much staff does it take is in charge of early voting at each city? I'd love to see Central Falls. I would love to see Providence. I'd love to know how much of a burden staff time and testing is, because I would rather see numbers that tell me and tell this board why we should change a law that just passed a year ago. So
Okay, that's a question, or is
Yes,
that just a
sort of. I would
statement?
love both part of it. The first one was a question. The second one, I guess, became a statement, but I would also love that data if
Well,
I could tell how much staff is in
Well,
each.
currently, it is covered under Chapter 20 mail ballots. And it has been around for many, many years. And it has become more popular in time. In 2020, the General Assembly agreed at the request of this board to allow a change to be made where the voter would then sign the poll book and the ballot would be deposited into a DS-200. Because all those ballots previously all had to be delivered to the Board of Elections. That passed, it was overwhelmingly received. We expect that it will continue to become popular, as in our opinion, there are 3 ways to vote in Rhode Island. They are all becoming equally similar, mail ballots, early voting, and election day voting. This procedure to go from 20 days to 14 days, again, is 4 days. It does help us in the testing of equipment, which is very critical, as we learned in the primary of 2022. The important part that we as the staff believe, and that's why this is before you today for your opinion, so we can send your opinion to the General Assembly, is should this be changed from the mail ballot chapter to the Chapter 19, which encompasses voting at a similar to a voting location polling place?
So there are 2 parts to this, is what
There
you're
are.
saying?
It's not, I mean, there are multiple parts to this bill. But yes, we were not consulted. We saw it for the first time when it was introduced.
And the staff was in favor of,
The staff
The
has
wording.
discussed this several times. The staff's opinion is that this is a beneficial bill.
okay. Any other questions or comments from any, oh, I'm sorry, were you finished, Ms. Bettenker?
Yes.
I'm sorry. Any other comments you'd like to make at this point?
I have, oh, sorry.
Mrs. Johnson?
Like leaning over.
I guess that's where I'm not confused. Well, first, let me say, I couldn't say it any better than Commissioner Bettenker, so I won't repeat what she said, but I also really struggle with the reduction. I understand it's 4 business days, it's still 6 days, and no matter how many people voted in that period, I don't think longitudinally you can make, that case based on the fact that this law has not been in place for very long. I think it's a big reduction. And so I am very concerned with that. And then can you go, so we are looking to change from Chapter 20 to Chapter 19. Is that a completely separate part of this?
It is.
It's all
Because,
baked in. Okay.
Chapter 20 is mail ballots.
Okay.
And it's coming out of mail ballots because, as you remember, in 2020, this procedure that now is only referred to as early voting in name only, it still technically is considered emergency voting, which has been covered under Chapter
Yeah.
20 for years.
Yes. Okay, I get. And then I guess my other question would be, we've cited, and Commissioner Bettenker had asked about time and staffing, and I think we've cited as part of the reason for supporting it as poll worker time and money and budget. So I would also be interested as to the cities and towns, what their weigh-in has been, what the Secretary of State's office weigh-in has been on this particular bill, and specifically the reduction in early voting days.
Can I ask, because if the point that you made that is really important about changing chapters, shouldn't then we can just introduce legislation to change the chapters, right? This bill is doing many things, right? And if changing the chapter is the one that it's a thing that seems to hopefully not be problematic, why can't we? That's an easy legislation to introduce, or just submit another sub-A. Just scratch the rest of it out. That would be more, to me, that would be more comfortable making those other legislative changes rather than changing the time frame of early voting.
I agree, but this item before you today is for, as in the past, all the bills that came before you that you looked at previously, it was, do you oppose it? Do you have no position? Or do you support it?
Mhm.
And then from there, we would get back to the General Assembly.
Right, so they're waiting for our position
They
on this
are.
bill. Did you have a question, Mr.
I just have a
Gisela?
question, actually, it's a question for council. Ray, just with regard to the last portion of this sub-paragraph C on the last page, are there any protections outside Chapter 19 that would be applicable to the in-person voting, early voting, that you're aware of? Because it only references 19, and I don't know why you would only reference 19 and they wouldn't reference the entire title.
Yeah.
I don't expect you to know the answer to that. I'm
Couldn't
just, you know,
answer
for
that off the top
discussion
of my
purposes.
head, but I do know that from reading this, the intention appears to be is to make sure that when you look at the early voting process, much like you even described for your own experience, that there are more protections in place so that it's considered to be a voting place, just like everything else under Chapter 19. But to that specific question, I'd have to do more like a survey of the chapters to see if there are others that should be added in here.
Yeah, I mean, that's really my only concern, that it's kind of limited to the protections of Chapter
Yeah.
19, but otherwise, I mean, I don't.
Although it doesn't
That'd be
say,
my
but although it doesn't say only. So I mean,
Correct.
that's a good thing, so that any other time that you have the voting process in the other chapters.
Okay.
What are our time constraints here, Bob? Do you know?
I do not. I mean, whatever decision you make today, we would send to the General Assembly tomorrow.
Okay.
But I have not been told when they needed an
Okay.
answer about it.
Okay. Do you have anything, Mr. Schultz?
No,
You good?
okay.
Mr. West?
Good.
Okay, what would be the action the board wishes to take at this point?
I would move to oppose the bill.
Ms. Bettenker moves opposition to the bill.
Second.
Do we have a second? Seconded by Mrs. Johnson. Any further discussion on the motion?
I would just ask, so is the opposition primarily because it's changing the 20 to 14?
Correct.
Yes. We should clarify that in the motion, probably.
Yes, yes. I would oppose the legislation based on the reduction of early days from 20 to 14.
Okay. So if we, just a question, if that motion passes, what happens with the rest of the bill that we may be in favor of?
Well, you
can
could, you
send
could convey a letter that
Correct.
would reflect
Mhm.
the board's support of the balance of it.
Correct.
We could, Bob, I think that would be something you could do.
Okay.
Because
Yeah.
it's similar to everything that we've been doing of sending sub-A amendments
Mhm.
and send a letter that we would be in support of parts of it. That would be
Yeah,
it.
so you could say in the event that the restriction of the 6 days was removed, the board reflected support for the balance of that piece of legislation.
We could do that.
Okay, so the motion is to oppose particularly the change in the time frame. And we have a second on that motion. Yes,
Right,
Mr.
right.
Schultz?
No, I was going to ask Bob a question on the 3-week period of early voting. Do you have any breakdown of statistics of those who voted the first week, the second week, and the third week?
What I have for numbers I had read for 2022 for the general election, there were 70,872 voters who participated in early voting statewide. Of that, 10,965 of those did so in the first 4 business days. And then for the primary in 2022, 16,870 voters voted early, and of that number, 13.3% or 2,249 voted in the first 4 business days.
But do you have a breakdown of the votes for each of the 3 weeks?
I do not.
So we know whether or not, you have more voting at the end versus less or more voting in the beginning.
There's definitely more
Did you,
voting.
did
towards
you
the
say
end.
there was 13% in the first
4 days?
4 days?
And
So then you
it's-
had 70.
And yeah, that's a
Yeah.
really high percentage. And because I really like the commissioner's question of if we have data. And the saddest part is that we wouldn't have data. One, legislation, like this has only been in practice, in law practice for a year. 5 years from now, we're going to have so much data about it because that's what happens. And more excitingly, even if we have 20 days, if people are voting in those first 4, it's all gonna depend on the city. It's all gonna depend on primary or general. So that'd be very exciting 5 years from now.
Bill, and I think your comment about, let's get through the presidential and see the numbers, was a pretty good comment to me. Yes? Did you
No,
have something else?
my concern about the 20 days is you are giving candidates a much smaller window to get their message out. And I think we've seen that in the last election, that the numbers from the early voting and the numbers from the election day, so to speak, have been problematic. Whether that's because, again, as Commissioner Bettencourt says, it's only been in effect for 1 year.
Mhm.
Or not. I mean, you are shrinking the time that a candidate has to get a message to the voters. And I think the 14 days maybe addresses that to an extent because it gives everybody an extra week. So I'm a little, I guess for my purpose, I'm a little on the fence as to whether to oppose it simply for the 20 days. But, I'll leave that to the rest of the commission to consider.
Any other discussion?
My question is, where does the impetus come from to reduce it? Other than the boards, the staff said we need more time. But is there a group out there or, or if other election officials say we should reduce the time?
Again, when we looked at it from the staff, we concurred because it did give us more time to do the testing under the protocols. We saw this bill, it came to us, we just went and testified as the staff in support of it based on the fact that it was introduced very late in the session.
Okay, so there's been no hearing so far.
And it was heard in the House.
So at that hearing, someone from the staff attended.
We did.
What was the reasoning for reducing it?
I wasn't there, but
Okay.
Jacob, Jacob was there. He testified on our behalf.
Yeah, if you can remember.
Would you come up, Jacob, and tell us what the discussion generally was?
The discussion regarding the shortening of the voting period was more in line with what Mr. DeSimone, or Commissioner DeSimone suggested from the candidate point of view. From the staff's point of view, as Bob has stated, it would give us a lot more time to do a lot more rigorous testing, which we do have planned already.
Mhm.
But from the representative's point of view, giving them more time to campaign, also the second biggest consideration they had was reducing the amount of time because the staff at the cities and towns struggled to get poll workers in the first place, but then also to maintain and pay them their going rate every single day for, in the case, I believe it's, for the 4 business days extra for a lot of towns, or just simply using clerks from other departments to fill in was, a burden. So.
Makes sense.
Just listen to the explanations, that now we're concerned about money instead of how the candidate gets their point across and how the public can make their decision as to who's the most viable candidate to vote for. So, and sometimes the money, you just can't look at the money end of it. You've got to have, the people have to have the right to decide in their mind who is the more competent person that you vote for. So I understand, where that's coming from, but I don't think that's the way we should look at it. I think we should look at it how the public gets to make the most knowledgeable choice that they can make. about who to elect during that period.
All set?
Just Madam Chair, so
Yes.
on that vein, I go back to, if you have particularly a new candidate challenging an incumbent, a longtime incumbent, that longtime incumbent has, I would tell you, a bit of an advantage if that candidate's window has shrunk. And if that candidate now has to be ready sometime in August, particularly for a primary, may have to be ready to run an election in a month and a half span of time, rather than under the old rule, it was election day. Now we've backed it up 3 weeks, which puts a challenger, if you will, at an extreme disadvantage. I would tell the board from my experience. I don't have any empirical data to support that. I don't think it's early enough for data. I think that's what the candidates' concerns are.
Mhm.
We saw it in play in the last election. Not to, you gave an advantage to people who were in office. So it is a double-edged sword, I guess. The 20 days is a double-edged sword because it does cut down on a significant amount of time. And anybody who's been involved in an election knows those last like 2 or 3 weeks are basically crunch time. And you're just pushing the calendar back on these people. So that's my only concern with opposing the legislation, but.
Okay, any other comments? Are we prepared to take a vote? We have a motion at this point to oppose this legislation, particularly the change to early voting from 20 to 14 days. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Right.
Those opposed?
Opposed.
I'm opposed as well. So the motion carries. Okay. Next item, item number 6.
So, Madam Chair,
Yes, Mr.
I
Shaw.
would say the letter should go out, as Bob indicated, with a concern about the 3 weeks, the 20 days. We're not opposing the rest of the bill
That's a good
itself,
point.
but only this particular aspect of it.
That's a good point. I think Bob is aware that he needs to get that done as soon as possible, correct?
I think the letter should indicate that it was a split vote as well. It was not a unanimous vote. So.
Item number 6, the board may discuss and vote on the renewal of the memorandum of understanding with the Department of Revenue Central Collections Unit regarding the collection of campaign finance fines assessed by the board. Mr. Thornton, are we going to hear from you on this? Or
Yes, you are.
Very good. Let's hear from you.
The initial memorandum of understanding between the Department of Revenue Central's Collections Unit and the Rhode Island Board of Elections was executed on May 10, 2019. The first renewal came up in September of 2021. That was for 12 months with an automatic renewal through June 30 of 2023. So we're approaching that deadline. This renewal, which would be the second renewal, the only substantive change is really that rather than for a 12-month period, it's for a 24-month period with an automatic renewal through December 31, 2026. To date, the referrals from the board to the Central Collections Unit, there have been 10 referrals so far with debt of $22,225. Through November 14, 2022, which was the last accounting received from the Central Collections Unit, the board has received back $4,664.17. To date, the referrals that have gone from the Campaign Finance Unit to the Central Collections Unit have largely consisted of appellants that have come before the board. The board has rendered a decision on a reduced penalty. The candidate has defaulted on payment, and the other would be consent orders that have come before the board where, again, the candidate has defaulted on payment. I am preparing an inventory of new cases to refer over there based on the board's renewal of the MOU, and those cases would come before the board at a future board meeting for your approval.
Okay. Any questions of Mr. Thornton?
I do, Madam Chair. Just, Rick, are you satisfied with the way the collections have gone through the collection unit? Are you satisfied with the progress they make?
I am. Again, I think we get into periods during the election cycle where our resources are dedicated to those candidates. So there are lags during the calendar year when we're not as active referring cases over there. But we're through the election. I fully anticipate more cases to be referred over there this year.
Okay,
I have a
yes.
couple of questions, Rick.
Sure.
How many cases altogether were referred?
There were 10 referrals. So
Altogether?
yes,
Did they bring suit on against any of these individuals?
they have not. They've not. They have, the communication has been strictly trying to work out payment plans, and the accounting that I received back from the Central Collections Unit, most of those debtors are on payment plans with that unit.
Have you received back any communication from them to say they will have to bring suit against an individual because they failed to comply or
Not at this time.
cooperate?
There is a provision in the MOU that the unit can settle for an amount lesser than what the board refers over there, but would need the approval of the executive director of the board here to do that.
Right.
But to date, there have been no suits filed in court yet.
Right. And you're satisfied with what they're doing?
Yes.
Okay. No other questions? Do we have a motion to approve the memorandum of understanding for a 24-month period?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Scholes. Do we have a second? Seconded by Mrs. Johnson. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Unanimous vote. Item number 7, the board may discuss and vote on a calendar created for the upcoming Special Senate District 1 primary, Tuesday, September 5th, 2023, and election Tuesday, November 7th, 2023. Mr. Raposo?
This calendar before you was created jointly between the Board of Elections and the Providence Board of Canvassers, and the day was selected to be consistent with the Congressional 1 primary and also the November 7th election day. This comprises of 4 precincts, which are part of Congressional District 1. The other precincts are part of Congressional District 2.
Any questions of Bob relative to the calendar? Hearing none, do we have a motion from the board to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Mr. West, seconded by Mr. DeSimone. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, unanimous vote to approve. Item number 8, the board may discuss and vote on a calendar created for the upcoming Tiverton election on Tuesday, August 8th, 2023. Mr. Raposo, please.
As stated, this is a Charter Review Commission. The calendar was created based on dates that Tiverton provided to us, and what it came to being is presented before you right today.
Any
I
questions?
just have one question. I looked at these calendars and we have the congressional district coming up too.
Mhm.
And I guess those dates basically reflect the same dates as the Senate District 1. But why aren't all these 3, with the same dates so that we just have to deploy the machines on one day?
They had to do with their charters.
Oh.
Their charters would dictate different times of having special elections.
Okay.
And that's why that's why
I'm sure they would prefer to have
Tiverton,
them all. at
I'm
the
sure
same
they would.
time.
And
Yes.
that's why this one is in August.
Yes. Do we have an action by the board on this calendar?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Scholes,
Second.
seconded by Mr. DeSimone. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, unanimous vote to approve. Item number 9, the board may discuss and vote on a calendar created for the upcoming Foster Town Council special election on Tuesday, September 5th, 2023. Same thing,
Same
Bob?
situation.
Same explanation.
The calendar is created based on the Foster Charter.
Motion to approve.
Moved by Mr. West, do we have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Scholes. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed, unanimous vote to approve the calendar as submitted.
Today, we had that vote. Was it 3-3?
No, it was 4-2.
4-2, okay.
Yes. Should have said that if I didn't.
Yeah, okay.
No further business to discuss. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Moved by Mrs. Johnson. Do we have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Simone. All in favor?
Aye.
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 We are adjourned at 2:47. Thank you. It was really good.
That was good. So I am going